Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the Extrasensory Perception Concurrent Session. I'm really excited about this session. I'm Thomas Brophy, I'm president of Institute of Nordic Sciences. I'm chair of this session. And first, we have the Institute of Nordic Sciences Director of Research, Helané Wahbeh, presenting on, what's the title?
It's right up there, it's big letters.
Okay, Beyond the Veil.
Thank you so much, Thomas. It's so wonderful to be here with you all today talking about a systematic investigation of trance channeling within UAP research. Okay, there we go. So some have called what we're in right now a UAP renaissance. There is such a huge interest in UAPs right now. And this whole term called psionics has been associated with it, which is this telepathy or mental impressions or other psychic experiences associated with UAP phenomenon. So Steve Guerrer started this CE5 movement, which is essentially using meditation, visualization, to call in spaceships, what they believe are spaceships, to show up. And also, you know, this is Ross Coulthart, who's actually speaking here at this conference, who interviewed people from the Skywatcher program who also say they are using psionics to bring in ETs. And Skywatcher has more of a military background, but this is really up and coming hot topic right now. And so this is exciting to me because it's not new. This psionic term is kind of a new term, but it's actually, these phenomenon have been noted in human history as long as we've been recording such things. Researchers in the West have been formally studying things like in the psionics bucket for 150 years, and IONS has been studying it for about 50 years. And so ION's guiding premise is that everything is interconnected, and that embodying that awareness reveals information and energy that's not limited by our conventional notions of time and space, which in turn can profoundly amplify transformation, innovation, and well-being. And so the psionics piece really fits into this central piece, and that's what I really want to talk to you about today. And so we propose that we all have the capacity for these extrasensory perceptions, but that perhaps the way that it shows up for each one of us is unique. And we know that there is an incredible diversity of how these noetic or psychic or ESP or whatever term you want to use to ascribe this accessing beyond our traditional five senses, they exist on a spectrum. They are incredibly diverse. So on one side, you have things like intuition and gut hunches. So how many of you in the room have had a gut hunch that turned out to be true? Okay, so that's like, 90% or so. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we might have things like mental mediumship or trance channeling that are much more rare, and I'll be talking about trance channeling today. And then in between, we might have telepathy or knowing the future, etc. But I'm going to focus on this end part here, which is this trance channeling, which I'll describe to you in a little bit. So this is really a global phenomenon, including the trance channeling. There was actually an early study that looked at 488 global societies and asked if they had some understanding of this, and 74% said that they did. And we have examples of this in Brazil with spiritism, spiritualism in the UK, and even in the Himalayas with the Ladakh people. And so trance channeling has been documented for millennia. In fact, many of our world religions were founded on some type of prophecy or channeled message. So, what is this intersection between trance channeling and UAPs or extraterrestrials? So when I started at IONS about 10 years ago, I building on the work of others, started the Ions Channeling Research Program, and we've done a number of studies on the broader term of channeling and trance channeling. And what I found was really interesting is when we did this survey with trance channelers, so about 83 trance channelers, and we asked them, what do you believe is the source of the material that you're getting? And if you look at this, the top three were your higher self, group beings, deceased human beings, but then we have extraterrestrials showing up at 36%. So 36% of the trance channelers believed that their source was an extraterrestrial intelligence. We also did this earlier study with 5 trance channelers. It was over 3 days. We did multiple sessions over those days. And they believed that there were 21 different apparent non-physical beings. And of those, there were many that showed up representing 7 different apparent civilizations. So I always found this incredibly fascinating and wanted to dive more deeply into that. And just for a little personal aside here, so I grew up with trance channeling in my family. So my mother is a trance channeler, my grandmother, my uncle. Starting at 10 years old, I went to spiritualist meetings at my grandparents' house. So I witnessed this in very trusted members of my family. And eventually, when I came to Ions, I learned how to do it myself. So this personal experience was very rich for me. And my mother and I would do sessions together all the time. And every once in a while, someone who claimed to be an extraterrestrial would show up, and it just completely blew me away. So I got very excited when UAPs made this huge renaissance because I thought, well, maybe I can actually formally evaluate this in some way. So on to the study I'm going to share with you about today. I'm calling this the Channeled Content ATI studies. So the study objectives were to collect trans-channeled information where the source was believed to be an extraterrestrial and put that in a data set. To also have a separate data set from traditionally acquired sources about UAP and ETs, like military documents, etc. And I'll go into that a little bit more. And then to do a thematic analysis to see what's the same and what's different. And also do a semantic analysis with the powerful tool of AI. So just to get into some definitions, so I mentioned trance channeling. What is trance channeling exactly? So trance channelers believe that their body is used as a vehicle for a non-physical being to speak through them. So you can imagine some apparent non-physical being. They use their voice box or use their hand to write, and the trance channelers believe that this is how information is coming through. Now, what I'm talking about is done consensually with permission. That's the belief, so it's not a possession or a malignant negative aspect. And it's also not mental mediumship where a medium might hear a message or see a symbol from, say, a deceased, what's believed to be a deceased human, and then translate that message for the sitter. So it's different from mental mediumship. And then the believed source, so what is an ETI, right? So we defined it as any form of intelligent life whose origin was believed not to be on the earth and included a wide range of beings, intelligent beings. Some examples you may have heard are Greys or the Palladians, Arcturians, Antarians, etc. And so in order to develop this channeling data set, we put it out to our very wide network to recruit trance channelers. They went to SurveyMonkey, they filled out a form, gave information about themselves, what they believed the source was going to be, summary of the material, etc. And then they were able to upload audio, video, or text files to SurveyMonkey, or also just email it to the team. We also, in addition to that, our research team did our own kind of scraping of the web to see if we could find trance channelers who believed their source was ET. And then we had to really go through them quite thoroughly to make sure that it met our inclusion-exclusion criteria. So that was done all manually. And then all of that data was transformed into text files, into JSON files, and then PDF files, and then uploaded with our collaborator to an AI query program. So that's the channeling data set. So now moving to UFO decks, which is the traditional data set. So this was created by our collaborator, Ryan Wood, who is the son of Dr. Bob Wood, who is a famous and longtime UFO researcher. And Ryan inherited all of Bob's materials from his decades of research and also continued on his own work to collate over 750,000 pages of UFO-related materials. And so this came from like FBI files, and I don't even know all the acronyms, you know, MJ12 and ARPA and DARPA and all the declassified materials. We could have fun with all those acronyms. And actually, this is available. So if you went to this website, you could query this data set that Ryan has created. It's an incredible tool. And everything was extensively curated, so he didn't do any scraping of the web. He really went through things quite methodically. So that was the other data set. And so we asked ourselves, well, if you could, what would you ask an extraterrestrial? Like, what do we ask these data sets? So we put this out to our Ion Science team. We asked our trusted advisors who are familiar with this field, and we ended up with 40+ questions. We thought that was going to be way too much. We really wanted to narrow it down to questions that could be queried of these kind of more static data sets. And so we ended up with 10 questions, and I won't read these to you here because I'll be going into more detail when we get into the results section. And then for the semantic similarity computation, we used 3 different models. There's really no gold standard right now in this type of analysis. So we picked 3 that kind of rose to the top in terms of reliability and popularity, if you will. What's nice about these 3 is they chunked out the content in 3 different lengths. So this top one was shorter phrases, the middle one was longer phrases, and then the last one was longer still. And so we were able to do all 3 of those, and then we averaged them, and I'll show you these results shortly. Okay, so the results. So for the channeling data set, I don't know if I'm blocking the slides here. For the channeling data set, we ended up with 274 entries. Most of those were kind of junk. I don't want to be negative, but they were like, you know, I got stoned and I had this amazing experience and blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you do participant research, but people don't often read, you know, the consent form or like what you're actually looking for. So we ended up with 52 eligible entries that were actually included in the data set, 6,000 pages. You can see the demographics here. This was done in the US in English, so it is, you know, a biased sample in that way. The channelers said that they had very different types of trainings to learn how to trance channel. Most of them spoke, you know, when they went into a channeling state, they would have that come through voice, but some just did automatic writing, where their hand would just move. Most of the dates were between 2015 and 2025 when the content was received, except for a very large body of text we got from The Law of One, or Carla Ruckert and Ra, which is a pretty famous channeler, and that was from the 80s. In terms of the perceived sources, there are a lot of supposed, I keep saying apparent and supposed and perceived. No way. Okay, I'm going to go really fast because I apparently have 5 minutes left. So there are many, many perceived ET sources for this data set. Okay, question number 1. What are the current plans, if any, for the public disclosure of extraterrestrial intelligence to all Earthlings? So all the next slides are going to look like this, where the common themes for the 2 data sets are on top, and then we extracted some unique themes below that. So the common themes is that disclosure should be a gradual, multi-phase process, that it's really about public readiness and vibrational, emotional maturity, the role of reducing fear in the public, and increasing collective openness. And that this is coming from, governmental agencies, but also people's interests, so top down, bottom up. In terms of the channeling uniqueness, it was really about consciousness readiness. So how essentially spiritually evolved is humanity? Have they owned they are more than their material selves? And this talk about vibrational thresholds being reached, and that it really is this consciousness-driven event. For the UFO decks, what was unique about that was governments orchestrating and trying to plan and trying to figure out how to roll this out to the public in a way that didn't create mass panic. In terms of the purpose of the visits, why are you supposedly here, right? Most of the common themes were around supporting planetary evolution and human development, involvement in observing and influencing Earth's transformation, and that there are multiple different ETs supposedly here doing that, and that some of them have different intentions. For the channeling unique themes, again, it was about service to others, supporting humanity to evolve, to become more awakened, to reduce violence, war, etc. That Earth is part of this galactic network, and it's getting ready to perhaps join that, and how do we ready humanity for that? UFO DEX was monitoring nuclear weapons, environmental risk, genetic research, and geopolitical manipulation and non-interference debates. So a lot of posturing around, well, how are we going to get this technology or this information or use it to our benefit? I got to really speed up because I probably only have a couple minutes. Relationship to humans, in general, is complex and may depend on the type of the ET. For the channeling, it really was about a shared, not humanity, but just shared universe. And we'll get to their beliefs, supposed beliefs about that. This I found incredibly fascinating because I don't know the UFO DEX material at all, but apparently in there was a treaty signed in 1954 between President Eisenhower and the Greys about what they could or could not do on this planet. So that was incredibly fascinating to see that. Human USP, it was in both was like, yes, ESP exists, this is known, and that was true in the channeling and the UFO decks. For the channeling, it was just a natural capacity, and that it's vibrational, awakened, will open when you get into that state. And UFO decks was about suppression and using it for some type of gain. Communication methods were pretty consistent about ETs using telepathy. I'm going to skip over that one. That was pretty consistent, actually. Space travel, bypassing classical physics. I think that's been pretty well documented in the mainstream. And, this one piece about using gravity field manipulation and wormholes. I mean, we heard about that during this conference. Perception of time, that it's not linear to the ETs, that it is multi-layered or consciousness-based, that we can shift time. Again, passing through this. Oh, okay, let me go back. Pictures? Yeah. Well, this will be a paper, so we'll make it available to everybody. Belief systems, essentially, everything is one. We are all interconnected, and we are, the emphasis on the channeling was co-creation and alignment with source energy, encouragement of humanity's spiritual awakening. And in the UFO decks, there was a little bit more variability in terms of maybe not so benign ETs compared to benign ETs. There was this very common theme about interstellar federations amongst different ET groups, and that there is a federation that is really benevolent and focused on supporting humanity, and that there is a particular ones focused in this part of the universe, and that perhaps there's others in different parts of the universe. And interestingly, both the channeling and the UFO decks mention this galactic federation, like the same named federation. And then in terms of free energy development, ETs possess advanced technologies, implementation on Earth from their perspective, like, okay, are they going to come down and just gift us with these technologies to support us? And as the theme was about really humans being ready for that ethically and otherwise, so that we wouldn't use it to harm each other, and that this technology actually already exists and is being suppressed. And that was in the channeling data set and the governmental data set. Okay, I'll pause there. Oh my God, that's awesome. Everyone goes like this to take the picture. Okay, great. So in terms of the semantic similarity, I'm going to just jump to these means and standard deviations. These are ordered by the highest similarity to the lowest. So the top was disclosure plans. So the disclosure was almost identical for the channeling and the military government data set, which is really fascinating. Perception of time after that, and human ESP. The lowest was space travel and technology development, and this makes sense to me because I imagine the UFO decks has a lot more tech-heavy materials that wouldn't necessarily come through in channeled content. So I know I went through that very quickly, and I didn't have a lot of time, but we are going to be publishing a paper on this. So if you stay connected to IONS, you'll definitely be able to get and the more detailed results, and also the actual summary documents will be released with that. So in terms of limitations, the biggest limitation is that we can't verify the source of that channeled content. Like, how do we actually do that? Until disclosure happens and they show up and I can talk to one and say, hey, was I right with all this stuff? We can't really know that. Obviously, channeling is subjective, influenced by the individual interpretation and beliefs of the channeler. UFO decks may reflect editorial bias from historical UFO sources. Semantic similarity also has its limitations and doesn't imply that it's real, even though it was in these data sets. Variability in channeling. I'm going to skip through this. Limited to English content, and the results are definitely exploratory. This is a very, very first study in this area. So both data sets had a lot of similar themes, which I was very surprised by. And the channeled content focused more on vibration and consciousness and spiritual awakening. The UFO decks was more about geopolitics and secrecy and controlling and divisiveness. And there was a high similarity between the data sets through the semantic scores. So thank you so much for hearing about this. The next step is to do a prospective study with trance channelers who believe that they can channel extraterrestrials. They will be invited to do so in 10 separate sessions with the intention of doing different species each session, and we'll do that with 10 channelers. So there'll be 100 sessions. We'll do the same type of content analysis. We are seeking funding on that, so if you know anyone super into this research who wants to support it, that would be amazing. Huge gratitude to all the people who have supported this work. You can find more information about the IONS channeling program at that website, and a big plug to our Conscious AI program. And I'm going to stop there. I probably don't have any more time for questions, so thank you. Great question. Well, we'll get a preprint out probably in the next couple months. So if you go to our website and get hooked up there, then you'll get to see it.
Okay, thank you so much. Next we have Jyotiranjan Beuria. Is that working? Looks like it's working good. Thank you.
So thank you very much for having me here. It has been really a great time for the last 3-4 days in TSC 2025. So I'll be speaking about something called, we have named it non-vision visual perception. I'm sure most of you have already seen this demonstrations yesterday and day before yesterday also by the kids who could recognize objects even if blindfolded. So we have been studying these kids for last 2 years very systematically. So I'll present some of the case studies. And this presentation has 2 parts. So I'll be speaking about the empirical studies, some of the empirical studies that we have been doing. And my friend Praveen, he would be presenting some theoretical model, philosophical model based on Indian knowledge system. So yeah, let's proceed. So this is the team. So we are working in collaboration with Institute for Science and Spirituality and IIT Mandi in India. So first of all, what is this blind vision or non-vision visual perception? So you see in the normal vision, we have this full setup, light source, the object of perception, the visual sense, the organ, the neural processing, and then the perceptual experience. So when this part is blocked, that means the eyes are blocked, so still this perception is happening. So we term this as non-vision visual perception. So the reason of naming it non-vision, because most of the times these studies are done with the tactile senses, just by touch. But this is not always the case. The kids that we have studied, they can recognize objects even if without touching also. So I'll present those cases. So this is just one example. Yeah, the history of these studies is pretty old. It dates back to maybe 100 years, few hundred years actually. It goes back to Robert Boyle, 1664. And there have been ample number of studies. Many cases have been reported in all over the globe. And you can see this is a Russian scientist studying this blind vision. It's pretty old. And the many other such studies have been done. But most of the studies, they are basically by touch. So we try to classify the studies that have been done through extensive literature survey. So some say this is just a physiological effect, maybe a sensory substitution or something like that. Some say this is ESP. Some say this is unknown phenomenon, say 15%. Some say this could be a methodological artifacts. And some say this is deception. Of course, I think many people, they think this is still a deception. So, but that was also the case for me. But over the years, last 2 years, I have been studying them. I'm from a skeptic, I have been a believer that this is a real phenomenon. Believe me, this really happens. So this is a summary of all kind of experiment that we have done. We have studied children who, with touch, they can identify, with smell, they can identify, without touch, they can identify. They can also identify hidden objects. You have some barrier, translucent barriers, they can still identify. Of course, we found only one, and that is sufficient to say that this works. And also different angle of vision. For example, you can put the object behind the back or keep it shifting to different angles. The people and the kids, they can still identify. Even in dark room, it's pitch dark. We don't let the kids know that it's dark, but some of them could identify only colors. So this phenomenon still works there. So let me rush through. So the first part of the study, we just surveyed the kids with some behavioral tasks. We asked them to identify shapes, black and white shapes, colored shapes, natural scenes, and like this many stimuli we presented. And this is the summary of last 2 years of our study. We studied more than 19 subjects. So most of the cases you will see the kids, they have almost close to 100% accuracy. So this, and some of them are pretty zero. And this is quite corroborated with since when they have started practicing. And we also trained, we brought those teachers, and in our controlled setup, we trained some of our kids, and they could also learn this art within a week or so. So the parameters of evaluation to get this accuracies are like the accuracy in identifying shape, color, texture, counts, background, foreground discrimination, how well they can read the text. So it has been pretty exhaustive. Then we moved on to more objective study by neuroimaging. So this in this study, part of this was presented by Professor Beuria yesterday. Yeah. Part of presentation. Okay. Okay, I'll. Okay. I cannot help with that. The music is being played at the back. It's not part of this presentation, but somehow it is being played. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we wanted to see the neural imprints on the kid's brain. So these are typical photos. So we made them identify 10 words, 10 numbers, 10 images, both during the normal vision and to compare that with the blindfolded vision. So this is from one subject. So with closed eyes, without blindfold, so we have this power spectrum plots for different frequency ranges, delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. So the same thing we did with closed eyes with blindfold. There is hardly any difference. But still, once the kids are tuned into that blindfold condition, they start identifying objects around. So probably because of that, there is a striking difference. So you can see, particularly in the beta and gamma band, there are quite a bit of difference. And this pattern is very similar to when they identify words or numbers or images. The gamma part is quite heightened, and this is just a summary of the statistical analysis that we performed on this subject of 5 with 10 epochs. So to move on to further aspects of this study, we also used high-frequency probes, thanks to Dr. Anirban Bandyopadhyay and Hide Sagosa. So we got exposed to this study of megahertz signals using the simple spectrum analyzer. And here we could see this is the resting condition with open eyes. And this red one is resting with closed eyes. And the green and the blue, green is the open-eyed identifying the word. And the highest one, the blue, is the blindfolded condition. And this megahertz signals, they yield pretty large, pretty efficient p-values, separating that from other baseline conditions. So next we move on to identify whether, I mean, some say this could be an intuition. So, or somebody may say that they're imagining something in their mind. So to contrast how the imagination works and how this sort of phenomenon works, we attempted to design experiment a little differently. Here the kids, they observe an image and they close their eyes and imagine the image, whatever they've seen. And the same thing we repeated with blindfolded condition. They identify the objects being blindfolded and then they imagine the image. So you will be surprised the pattern that we saw earlier, the beta and gamma band, they're quite heightened, and the same thing repeats. And this time we did with 64 channel and neuro device. So this is the summary. So for the shapes, in the normal vision, this is the pattern that we observed, and shapes with blindfolded. So you can see the beta and the gamma band, they are so heightened, and the delta, theta, and alpha, so they have diminished. And the same thing for imagination also. For normal vision imagination, comparing with the blindfolded imagination, these plots and these plots are quite similar. So there is something deep happening here, and probably similar kind of, not similar, quite close also in some sense. Experienced meditators, they have reported and they have been seen yielding high gamma oscillations. So probably in this blindfold condition, they are entering into very deep kind of meditation. So probably this is just a suggestion. To further, till this point, I was still skeptic. So what we did is, we said, let us identify whether light is really entering to the retina or not. So we brought the teacher, this is the trainer. So this trainer, we brought this trainer to a very famous eye hospital in India. So there in the clinical settings, we performed this electroretinogram. This electroretinogram measures the electrical activity on the retina. So it's a little painful. They use electrodes on the retina. And there you see the results. This is the normal vision without blindfolded, and this is blindfolded. So, and this division, the scale is 2.5 microvolt per division. So that means this is around 5 microvolt. So in the normal conditions, when the person is healthy with closed eyes, this is the typical range of retinal activity. So that means the person is not lying. It's not cheating. So there is no hardly any electrical activity as compared with the normal vision. So certainly after this study, I was, I would say 90% convinced that this phenomenon is real. Of course, now I am almost convinced. So, and in summary, we performed a few other things also. I don't have time to describe all of them. So somebody may say that this could be a case of sensory substitution. There have been some studies many studies on sensory substitution. Some may say that this could be like a blind sight, that when the brain rewires itself to find a different network when your visual cortex is damaged. But I think it's much more than that, because the kind of spectrum that we saw these children displaying of different things identifying, I think it's much more beyond that. It requires a totally non-local explanation, a totally different model of explanation. So I would ask Mr. Praveen to take it over and present a very nice philosophical model, which could be probably tested in some empirical research. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I will now present so this is the science from empirical observations and all. I'll be presenting a yogic science, because in India, India is the land of yoga, and of course the yogic science. So what explanation we can have why these phenomena are happening, and especially in children. So I'll be presenting this, whenever I say IKS, that means the Indian knowledge system. That includes the whole gambit of Vedic literature. That includes the Vedas, that includes the Upanishads, that includes the Puranas, and further commentaries on them. And the 6 classical Indian philosophies, like Nyaya Vaisheshika, Sankhya Yoga, Vedanta and Mimamsa. So it's all mix, combination. So our Indian philosophical traditions, they talk about perception. It's a long tradition of multiple, discussions of over 2,000 years of, more than 2,000 years, and hundreds of, like in the, okay, only 5 minutes. I'll move fast. So, in our tradition, the perception is divided into 3 parts. One is the ordinary perception, like every one of us has, and the second is yogic perception. In yogic perception, basically, the person who has developed some yogic capability through meditation or contemplative concentration or that kind of practices, so they do not require basically. If you see this, in ordinary perception, we require sense and object. This is my eye, sense of vision, and this, for example, this is the object. So unless and until the object comes in contact with the eye through some medium, I will not sense. So this is what the normal perception is. But in yogic perception, this contact is not required. You can bypass it. Okay. So, but in the initial stages, when somebody starts practicing yoga, especially the meditative practices, in the initial stages, you need the contact of the senses, maybe in a different way. But gradually, when you advance, then you can, you do not need that contact, and your mind can simply access that information. So we have, gradations in perfection, starting from the yukta yogis who are practicing, and then viyukta yogis who are perfected beings. And for example, Nyaya Vaisheshika talks about yogis through sustained bhavana. It's a Sanskrit word which means the creative contemplation. They develop pratibha. It's a Sanskrit word. The loose translation is intuition. In the purified mind capable of receiving subtle, remote, and temporal. This is the exact translation from the text. And then yoga also talks about when dharana, dhyana, and samadhi are unified on a single object means the object of perception. They form sanyama, producing prajna. Prajna means a discriminative insight, okay, which leads to manifestation of prameya, the object of knowledge. Now, after this, now the still higher, we have another level of pratyaksha or perception, that is Vaidusha pratyaksha, where you have direct access to the transcendence. Here we are talking about the access to some supernatural things, but not transcendence. This is access to transcendence. So this is something very that requires great capabilities and great elevation in spiritual practices. But this is something a lot of gradations are there. Like we see the kids with little bit of meditative practices, they are able to do it. Yeah, so NVPP, our contention is that this NVPP seems to fall within the preliminary stages of certain specific categories of yogic pratyaksha in classical Indian philosophies, like Patanjali's Sanyama or Kannada's Yunjana Yogi, Prashastapad, and Udayan's Vyukta Pratyaksha, and Bhasurvagna's Ayukta Vastha. The name which I am taking, these are the names of the authors, and they are, some of them are 1500 years before, some of them are 2000 years before. Okay, so now the model of perception I am presenting is, this is based on Srimad Bhagavatam. So Bhagavatam, it's a Puran. Puran means basically when the Vedas were written down, and finally then the Brahmanas, Aranak, and Upanishads came, and finally, because they were very difficult to, to be accessed by the ordinary people, then Puranas were written. And Ved Vyas was the personality who wrote Srimad Bhagavatam, and that is considered as the summary study. It's a culmination of the Vedic literature or Vedic knowledge. So I had taken Bhagavatam, that's why. So if we start with the object, for example, see, we want to see the apple. What happens next is, then the next, so in any sensory perception, there are 4 elements. One is the object of perception. Second one is the senses are required, the external senses. And third one is the inner sense, which is basically the mind, intelligence, false ego, and chitta, we call in our Vedic language. And then finally, the conscious entity, that is the soul or Atman. So this is the second level. And then third is, as I said, the antakarana, which is a combination of your manas means mind, and then buddhi means intelligence, chitta, and ahankara, the sense of self, and then atman. So these four portions are required in every perception, whoever is doing, whether we are doing or anyone, So now what happens is, so it starts from here. The chitta wants to see. It wants to see, like, say, I want to see. The desire will arise. Unless and until I have the attention, I pay the attention, I cannot see. Every one of us has this experience. Unless, okay, yeah. So unless we pay attention, we don't have the perception. Everyone has this experience, right? So attention is very important. Attention comes from chitta, okay? So desire arises in the chitta, it wants to see. Then this chitta, along with so this I need to explain now. In Vedic knowledge, the senses are basically, eye is not the sense, it's just an instrument. The real sense is eye carries the sense inside it. That is basically the Shakti, in Sanskrit we call it, or the capacity in English we may loosely translate it. The real sense is the subtle sense which this physical eye carries. So that's why I divided this in two types. This is the Golaka, means the sthul which we see this eye. And inside we have a Chakshu, that is the subtle sense. Okay, so this Chitta, when it wants to see, it goes through the subtle sense and the gross sense, and it forms an image. The sonar, the torchlight, and immediately an image is formed. Similar kind of thing. And then that form is carried by this, that is known as vritti in Sanskrit. And that comes here first. So as soon as I pay attention, the awareness will come in my chitta. That just awareness. I have not identified it yet that this is a apple, okay? Now, that's why I've shown it, little hazy. Then, after this, next is it will come to the manas, and manas means the mind. And mind, the function of mind are assimilation, analysis, discrimination. Then I know it's apple, okay? And then next comes to the level of ahankara, which is the self-referencing vritti. I want to taste it. Or, oh, the apple is so sweet, like that, So that self-referencing, it connects, the whole memory and everything with me. And then it goes to buddhi. So Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Purana, it describes buddhi as dravya sphurana vijnanam, which means it manifests an object to the conscious entity. Now we have still not reached the level of soul or Atman, the unit of consciousness, okay? We are still at the level of inner sense, which is antakarana or a mind, okay? Now, finally what happens is, at the level of buddhi, the final vritti, as a specific form of buddhi, this is formed, and this now reflects, this final form is reflected in the jiva or the conscious self, which is the field of consciousness, and that's how, so this is the process of perception, and it happens so quickly that, these stages we do not feel. It happens like this, sudden. Now what happens in NVVP, so this area is blocked. We are simply blocking the physical sense, the physical eye. So what will happen? And parallelly, remember that these kids, whoever is doing this NVVP, they have done some kind of, sometimes like 40 hours of meditative practices, or sometimes they are doing 2 years, 6 months, even 10 years of meditative practices they have done for this. So they have developed certain kind of, ability because of this yogic practice of meditation. So they are able to, even if this is blocked, what will happen? This chitta, it's a subtle sense, through the subtle sense of chakshu, it can bypass this and capture the image. So this is the path which happens when this. So this explanation is basically, it's not my view. This explanation is already mentioned in our, the Vedic literature, especially with little bit of variations. It is mentioned in the Nyaya, it is mentioned in Vaisheshika, it is mentioned in Sankhya, it is mentioned in Yoga, and also the Vedanta. And Srimad Bhagavatam is basically a culmination of all these philosophies in a very, so that's why Srimad Bhagavatam also describes this kind of explanation. This is, okay, I'll go to now this is my final slide. So what I am presenting is, it's a top-down, okay. It starts from the Antakarana wants to see, and then this is top-down, and then parallel also. So how the perception is happening. So even in normal situation, this is not yogic perception, okay. So top-down parallel cognitive framework for perception. So the Antakarana wants to see the buddhi, ahankara, manas, then through pranic channels, through chakshu, the physical object is seen, and finally, this is the perception, and then once it has happened, so the parallel information is passed on to the, the eye, retina, optic nerves, and LGN. These are the pranic channels which carries the, the neural current, and then at the level of antakarana, the, brain is also getting activated, and finally, action is done. Why brain is getting activated? Because it needs to be, the whole body has to work according to the perception. If I have seen I want to eat the apple, then from brain the information, it will activate my limbs so that I can capture the apple and eat it. So that's why this action is also part of the perception. So the conclusion I'm drawing from this, so NVVP is a real phenomena. Neural markers suggest that it is very close to deep meditative states. It opens up avenues for fundamental overhaul of the understanding of perception and cognition, possibly a non-local effect. Indian philosophy presents a rich model for such a phenomena. This skill has the potential of enhancing the cognitive abilities for both the blind and the healthy individuals. Further studies with larger sample size is underway. Future studies will explore NVVP on blinds also. Thank you very much. And sorry I took longer time.
Thank you so much. Okay, next we have Ulf Holmberg. Are your slides in here?
Yeah, it's on the computer.
That's yours?
Is this on? All right, can you hear me? Perfect. All right, so my name is Ulf Holmberg, and I'm going to present a study and a paper I've written. It's called Can Consciousness Nudge Randomness? So let me give you a little brief history about myself and my research. I've been, since 2020, very interested in global consciousness projects data. So the Global Consciousness Project has set out these random number generators all around the world and claimed that they actually pick up large global events like tragedies or terrorist attacks, but also like happy moments that could leave traces in the data. So I started investigating if that was true and using my background, and found massively strong correlations with the global stock market returns and internet search trends, which is exactly what you would expect given that the Global Consciousness Project's hypothesis was right. The question then is, what's causing it? What's actually causing it? That sort of bugged me. So I started deriving a verifiable method that you could study these deviation from randomness structured way, so you could follow it and see where the science takes you. So that is what I'm going to present to you now. Now, first of all, why even study randomness? And I would say it's all related to information. And so empirical evidence actually suggests such a link exists, that randomness can be nudged by consciousness. So that's loads of paper studies there. It stretches back into the early 60s, but even further back. But in the early 60s, there was a structured way to start studying this. So you'd have a very, very small deviations from chance, from focused intention or attention. That was very weird. Now, obviously, there's some skepticism out there, and that's related to that we don't have a theory for it. And if you don't have a theory for it, you can always say, like, oh, okay, so could you repeat that experiment, please? And yeah, well, you could find empirical evidence that shows it, but you can't really say what's actually causing it. But thankfully, physics is catching up, and so is theories in general. So the physics is shifting towards that information might be the most promising or the most fundamental things in nature. And if it's information, well, that's exactly what consciousness is, structured information, right? So you can find a link that way. And neurology is also shifting towards information, actually, that in how you structure information is towards the Bayesian updating model. So it's a Bayesian updating machine. I think that's what the neurologists call it today. But still, we need a link. And that is what I try to put together. And I call it the cognitive entropy shift model. And it tries to bring this together, and it suggests that consciousness acts as an informational constraint. So somewhat like in the neurology, just that it actually extracts it from an informational field, you can call it. So you can modulate entropy in physical systems by just assuming that, and then you can create a model, a mathematical model, which I did, and I'm going to show you it, that enables rigorous empirical testing. And so let's see what happens there. All right. So the cognitive entropy shift model in a nutshell, or the CHESM. So cognitive states shape randomness through a three-stage process. That's what it's designed for to do. So first you have consciousness, which we can call observations. That would be you want something, you intend for something, you attend, you something of your will is in there, and that. So if you have probabilities are all there out there, and some things might happen, we can call that the prior probability. Now you have conscious observation or your will to change it. And then you take that together with it and you derive something that you can call a posterior probability. That's exactly Bayesian updating in practice. So that's a picture there. Now what that is then done, at least it's assumed that it shapes entropy by sort of like in creating order, so entropy reduction. That's the last picture there. And how that would work is that it actually, our brain accesses information from a hypothetical shared informational substrate. So that's the whole idea. So consciousness is structured information, and if it actually processes it that way, much like the Bayesian brain hypothesis actually says it does, but it's not created by the brain, it's a receiver, then this actually all makes sense. So just suddenly like that. So that's the whole idea. So how would you model it? So the way I did it is I'm treating it as an open question, exactly how it's done. So, but for that to be done properly, you need a very rigorous model that can be designed. You can use to design hypotheses ahead of data creation. So I've said, history says that intention is very important. Now there's studies from the peer lab. That definitely show that intention could modulate for random systems. Now attention, that's the Global Consciousness Project, they've been studying that for years now and showing very, very significant results. And then of course there's an interaction term between them, because if you intend for something, obviously you have to be attentive. Now, you just plug that into a mathematical model and you weight it, we can call it the beta weighting, and then because we want to be agnostic exactly with the mechanism, we just include distance. Some say distance isn't important at all, and I'm actually looking at it and showing that that's true for intention. But for attention might be a slightly different story. So that is why you would see like effects if you put a random number generator in a room, for instance, for meditation purposes, that could react to that specific event, but not to the world events around it. So that's probably what's causing that one. So we're going to separate between intention and intention, that's it. And we're going to weigh it with the distance then. And then we're going to sum over n, that's the n participants or n observations. So it would be like if you have 100 observations but 2 participants, that would be 200. So, and then you normalize, and that's an important part because you want to make this able to be, you could backtrack historical results. So historical results always report these statistical anomalies as deviations from chance. So basically you have your chance expectation would be 0, and then you have a deviation for that one, which should have a standard deviation of 1. So if you normalize in that sense, you can actually backtrack historical results, which I did as well. And then you say like, oh, would be the effect on, for instance, an RNG expected output. And the higher, the larger it is, obviously, the larger the effect. And that's the model here. I'm not going to go through it, but it will converge to 6 when it's maximum. So 6 sigma is also exactly what you would expect, like for if you would asking for the Nobel Prize. And in that sense, that's basically how rigorous they are. All right, so now you have a model, right? And you have historical data that seems to support it. Now I want to empirically validate it. So I'm going to test this in the real world. And I'm going to invite you to my former home that looks a bit like this, because I use this as a controlled domestic environment, or controlled in the sense that I knew what was going on. So I knew where and when these sort of events that could affect the cognitive entropy model would occur. And then I focused on predictable daily stress period, which was mornings. I have 2 young children, just so you know, and morning periods can be, time constrained, and so that's predictably, because I want to be able to find a period in time that's always stressful. So over years, so I collected data using a true RNG version 3, ordered from Amazon, and I predefined this setup and hypothesis. So in ahead of time, I said this is when it's going to cause it, and then I collected data for 2 years. That's important. So that's where I placed it. And here's how the living space looked like. Here was the device. It was placed around here, just around the TV. Importantly, the TV was never used in mornings. So the electromagnetic signal from that one was sort of like, it was used in evenings, but that didn't show up in the data, but it was mornings. So anyways, one kid lived here, another one there. So they're very close to the device. So fun and play games, they will play around here. So we're going to separate that because it was the drama zone, the exit, that's where we actually think something's going to happen. So it's around 10, 20 meters, something like that. All right, so how would you test an hypothesis like this? Now you're running data day in and day out for 2 years. Now, you can't really just look at it. You're going to have sort of a way to analyze deviations from massive data sets. So I'm going to look at the differences in mean values. So that's basically what I'm going to do. But you're going to use the Wells t-test statistic, which is a method that is robust against unequal variances, because that's what I think actually happens as well. It's not just the mean shift, it's actually a variance shift as well. So I'm going to use this one. And that's important because it also becomes more conservative in a sense. And then I'm going to normalize using a roll window of data. So it's like every month I would basically standardize, and then I'm going to Bonferroni correct it. Bonferroni correction is a way to reduce the risk of false positives. And so you tighten the p-values, and sort of like, if I find a significance using Bonferroni correction, it's definitely significant. All right, so what collected data from March 2022 to March 2024. So in the end, I had like around 48 million observations. Now that's, as you would see, it's not 24 months, it's actually 18.4 months, and that's because sometimes we were away on vacation, the data there wasn't collected. And then, when you're looking into the data as well, and would see like, during those weeks we went home, and, I'm going to take that away as well. So I'm just going to focus on the exact dates we are home, and that ends up with around 16 months of data. Now you break that down, you would see like if this sub-period of the data sample I'm going to study, that I'm going to postdate is different from the full data set. That's around 1.2 million observations, and I break that down into around 400,000 observations each. And that is be able to study what's going on. So here is the period when they play around, here is when we prepare, and here's when we go out. So then we see like it's probably around here it's going to happen. And more importantly, exactly this period if we slice it down even further. And then we have a control period. So let's say if this is true, it's going to stop exactly when we leave. So and why would I know that? Because I knew that school starts at 8:15, so we definitely need to be out of the house by then. So that's great. It's also good to know that there is a high school over here that also starts around 8:15. So if it's them we're picking up, this will be the significant part. All right, so here we go. So how did the results vary during the morning? Nothing going on, fun and play. Everybody's happy. Nothing going on there. Like this slash here is the Bonifroni correction on the right side. So you would see like it's p-value of 0.26, and then if we Bonifroni correct, it's actually nothing at all. Now, and in the end, here we have subtle shifts going on. Sometimes you leave early, of course, morning meeting, so that makes sense. But if you Bonifroni correct for it, it's not significant. But here, that's massively significant. So that's pretty awesome, actually. It was exactly as you predicted, and but more importantly, what happens here, it's the t-value drops to minus 4.345. So odds against chance is 1 in 72,469, which is very, very low for this. And then what happens when we leave that? Nothing, just like vanishes right away. So it seems to be definitely something here. And if you look at the full period of time, we would see like, okay, here we have odds against chance of 1 in almost 18,000. So that is also massively significant. So you're just looking at this 4 to 5 minute window, you would say like something's going on here, and then you can break it down. And as I did, this is what caused that period here. But then it's important now, because now you can look at this 4 to 5 minute window and say like, okay, so maybe something else is happening during the day that also picks it up. So let's look at that. Here we go. So I did that. I broke it down into 32 4 to 5 minute chunks over the day, and then I looked at the full 2-year data set. And then I Bonifroni corrected, so I have like here's like a Bonifroni threshold, and you would see like actually it's only one period or out of it that breaches that threshold. The rest is within sort of like normal bands. So I found that very interesting. So and then I just sliced out the nobody home dates as well, and it ends up just like fluctuating around chance, which is pretty impressive. So this is when we're home, this is when we're not home, and it doesn't even breach here. It's just like randomly fluctuation within the error bands. So this is 2 years of data aggregated, of course. So that's what's causing it. All right. So then, of course, we are in as I said, critics are going to attack this. So of course, so we have to address potential criticism. Could it be something else? Maybe it's so. So temperature sensitivity actually was ruled out. First of all, we monitored the temperature, obviously, because we live there. We don't want it too hot. But we know that summer periods are extremely hot because we had skylights. We had like 7 skylights very close by there. So it was very, very hot when nobody was home, when we didn't have the air conditioner on. So summer temperature was very hot. But as you would see, most of the time we weren't home was during summertime. And then there was no significance there. So that is ruled out as a feasible explanation, actually. Movement, and maybe that's the one that's causing the results. No, not really, because most movement around the device happened between 7:30 and 7:45. Dressing, play, and all that. Fun and games. Sometimes we even meditated around there. Nothing going on. No significant deviation at all. So no, not that as well. And importantly, randomness or stochasticity returned immediately after departure. I wouldn't say immediately because I don't really know, because I broke it down in 50-minute chunks, but if the 50 minutes directly after departure did it show anything. So this points towards that proximity and emotional presence are necessary for the effect. So that was interesting. Now, also, then you have this option stopping that's also always used. So, why did you actually collect this data during that period and not that period? Well, I had a predefined 2-year window. I said, like, I'm going to do this for 2 years. I also had halfway stop, and I presented it at the GCP2 meeting, Global Consciousness Project 2 meeting, and with the very clear results. And I said, I don't really trust the results yet. I'm just going to keep on going because, it's very interesting results. So I kept it going for 2 years, and yeah, that's what you see here. Now, so what does the cognitive entropy shift model actually say about these results? Well, if you actually plug it into the math equation, and you would say, like, well, what is the emotional attentional intensity there? It would say, like, it's around 8.6 during the 7:55, 8 to 10 peak window, and that's on a 10-year 0 to 10 scale. So it was very, very. I mean, you know how it is. It's we have to go. No, we don't want to go. That's how it goes. Anyway, so distance also seems to be very important for this cognitive state and the effect here. So I just kept everything constant in the equation and then just varied around with the distance parameter, and you would see, like, actually, it seems like if you are around 1 kilometer, basically significance disappears. So that also could be able to explain why these random number generators needs to be localized at different places. And when it comes to this type of states. Now, intention, as I said, might be a slightly different story, but at least when we get emotional attention, is definitely space dependent. Now, we don't really know if it's physical space or if it's mental space, but mental space tends to be correlated with physical space. I'm just going to go with space here. So anyways, the results definitely supports the cognitive entropy shift model's predictions. So the results that suggest that emotional attention acts as an informational constraint, such that consciousness can affect probabilities. And I think that's kind of like the key here. That's what's causing it. Let's think of it as not a mind-matter interaction in the sense that you're actually affecting the process, but you're affecting the probabilities of something materializing. So and then also, as I said, it's designed so you can plug it into historical results and sort of like back out and reinterpret them. So I did this with the classical study that made in 1988, and also recently published paper by Roger Nelson in 2024, which is sort of when he went to Egypt with some colleagues and studied different things. And you could basically see you can use this to break out emotional attention and intention during some very easy assumptions, like and you can, there we go. I was even used the Lesquist studies from 2011 when he studied a baseball game. See, like, what's the maximum attention in a game, and during that game, and it was pretty high, 8.6 to 76. So, all right, so let's sum up. I don't know if what I am on time is okay. Oh, great. So summing all up, CESM, or the Cognitive Entropy Shift Model, offers a structured framework for this type of analysis. So it advances the field, according to me, because it presents the first model for linking consciousness and entropy reduction in a systemic way. So, and importantly, it should and must be updated based on your empirical findings. So it's so general in a sense that, we find this effect, then we can plug it in there. And so we update it on that sense. So, but what does it say? So that's a statistical part of it. It could be used as a very powerful statistical tool. But what does it say about consciousness in general? Well, it postulates that information is primary, and consciousness is structured information, which is what we all basically know, right? We know our thoughts have meaning because there's some sort of structure in it. The mind then acts as an entropy-reducing informational agent, if you want to use that scientific language, imposes structure on randomness, such as cognitive states, can bias stochastic outcomes. That's the idea of the model. So the mind is an active organizer of probabilistic systems and not just a passive observer, which could be why, affirmation works in a sense. If I wish, in a sense, we can sort of shift probabilities in that sense, so slightly, ever so slightly. So summing up, your vibes actually really do matter. Yeah. Just going to give thanks to the GSP team, Roger Nelson and Cedric and Tiago and George Williams and Scott Wahbeh. They helped reading the paper. Go comments. Thank you.
We have time for one question while Alex comes to set up his presentation. Does anyone have a question? Oh, okay. Oh, okay, shout.
Tell us a little bit about the random number generator.
Sorry?
Technology that you're using.
Yeah.
Because I imagine that's quite,
Oh yeah.
that's something that's digital.
It is a physical random number generator using the avalanche effect. So that's so there is a lot like you're pressing the electrons and to a very specific point, and then a random amount of them rolls over with this expected mean and standard deviation around that. So that's true. Yeah. Yes. So it is accepted by the Journal for Scientific Exploration. So it will be ready shortly. So. Yes.
I look at weekends versus weekdays because that should be different in terms of the stress level.
I totally agree. I unfortunately haven't done that. So it was included here. So that's adding noise to it. And in a sense, I'm suspecting the results would be even stronger just picking those weekends out. So it's only weekdays. But here it is included. Yes, back. Come again?
Do you have any thoughts for any possible mechanisms?
Any thoughts on? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Could you
What's the underlying mechanism by how it's generating this effect?
what if I have thoughts on what's generating it?
Yeah, what's affecting the random number generator?
Yeah. So the random number generator was just left passive, right? So it's going to pick up everything there. And it was the avalanche effect causing these numbers, sort of like that's the term for it. So it's like a quantum process in a sense, even though it's not like a quantum tunneling, but it is a quantum process in because it uses electrons. And yeah, that's. But what's causing it in general? I think it is emotional engagement and intention that's causing it. I think that at least aligns with the data. Yeah.
Really great work. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is Álex Escolà-Gascón here? Okay, then we'll skip to Anatoly.
Hi everyone, it's a great privilege to be able to speak on this wonderful conference and to present my humble work in the field of extrasensory perception, just trying to make some sense of it, including I believe that philosophy of idealism has something. Hello. I believe that philosophy of idealism can serve as possible framework for ESP, for extrasensory perception. This is just the agenda. You can look at it for 10 seconds here. First of all, I define consciousness for the purposes of this talk. Consciousness of a life form is self-awareness plus ability to store, process, and exchange data with other life forms. By data, I mean emotions and factual information. ESP, such as telepathy and clairvoyance that I'm trying to consider here, are often rejected because there is no accepted theory or framework explaining it. Classical physics says, of course, that all signals fade with square distance in space, hence non-local telepathy and clairvoyance are hard to grasp. At the same time, we currently witness a renaissance in science. Idealism of Pythagoras, Plato, Leibniz, Hegel, Kant is revived based on modern data. That is important. For example, recent work of Bernardo Castrap, Donald Hoffman, Federico Fagin reintroduce idealism idealism and demonstrate a tectonic shift in the philosophical foundations of modern science. The Manifesto for Post-Materialist Science is by now signed by 550 MDs and PhDs, showing growing acceptance of the post-materialist science by research community. And just briefly touching Kant's transcendental idealism, Kant said already over 200 years ago that space and time are merely formal features of how we perceive objects, not things in themselves that exist independently of us. We return to this point later. Space-time in modern physics, very briefly. Adding a dimension in string theory as an easy way to create M-theory means that space-time is not fundamental, as stated by David Gross, Nobel Prize in Physics 2004. See his paper, Einstein and the Search for Unification. This statement appears to be consistent with Kant's transcendental idealism. Per the Manifesto for a Post-Materialist Science, the psi phenomena like telepathy, clairvoyance, near-death experiences during cardiac arrest, replicable evidence from research mediums, all these phenomena appear anomalous or paranormal only through the lens of materialism. We drop materialism and no problem. Consistency of ESP with idealism. Telepathy and clairvoyance are much more consistent with idealism rather than materialism. Why? If space-time is not fundamental and we consider consciousness as primary, non-local thoughts and feelings themselves can be considered as the medium, so no need to transfer them. They can be just shared non-locally. Especially when there is a bond between people, their minds may become entangled, simplifying telepathy, and it was discussed, of course, in the book by Dean Radin, Entangled Minds. But of course, there is a big problem with noise. We have 8 billion people only on this planet. And of course, if we start getting input from all 8 billion, it will be overwhelming, it will be impossible. So that's why it's probably, there is a filter allowing to filter out for some selected people only information from their closest people with whom they have bond. Now, per Donald Hoffman's conscious realism, space-time is not fundamental, as we already mentioned above. It comes from physicists. The world is represented by a network of conscious agents. See his book, The Case Against Reality, very good book. Many main functions of the conscious agents are perceive, decide, act, per his book. Now, I suggest that telepathy could be considered a normal means of communication between the conscious agents. I also believe that conscious agent might be modeled as a conscious unit of quantum field introduced by Federico Fagin. When a conscious agent establishes a stable interface with the human brain and body, or the human avatar, brain waves are generated. It's also important to realize that the physiology of the human body distracts the conscious agent from ESP phenomena, like telepathy and clairvoyance. I find helpful an analogy between the consciousness in the avatar with a driver in the car, where the driver is consciousness and the car is the body. Under normal conditions of life, human focus is on survival and thus on immediate surroundings. Thinking about Pluto while driving is risky, or while crossing the road, the same. On the other hand, when loved ones, such as family members or close friends, are in danger, ESP mechanisms may activate, love serving as a trigger. Successful ESP dreaming experiments were carried out in a sleep laboratory at the Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn by Ullman and Krippner. This is well known, but it was a while ago. There are claims that a resonance between the Earth electromagnetic field frequency and the frequency of dreaming brain would greatly increase amplitude of the signal and support dream telepathy and clairvoyance. Now, space between Earth's surface and conductive ionosphere acts as a waveguide, serving as a resonant cavity for extremely low frequency waves. The Schumann resonances are a set of spectral peaks, and the extremely low frequency portion of the Earth's electromagnetic field spectrum. Now, if we look at the brain waves and their frequencies, we see that first starting the Schumann resonance at about 8 Hertz. We also see that relaxation with closed eyes, the brain waves are alpha waves, also 8 to 13 Hertz. There's good condition for resonance here. 8 Hertz and 8 Hertz basically. And drowsiness is stage 1, sleep, theta waves, in 4 to 8 Hertz. I myself had anecdotal experience receiving telepathic signals exactly when I was relaxing in the subway. As soon as I relaxed, I was doing computer support in the hospital. I was 10 miles from the hospital, but I saw a face of a lady who needed my help. And then when I came to work, I saw 3 emails from this lady. She desperately needed my help. And then she said, oh, she called technical support, and then, because it took me 40 minutes to get there. And then the technical support resolved the issue, but there were 3 emails in my mailbox from her. And I received the signal from more than 10 miles, just in the subway. Now, this is anecdotal evidence, but it's like when it happens to you, you kind of believe it. It's significant. Now, resonance between frequency of dreaming brain, 4 to 8 Hertz, and Earth's electromagnetic field, Schumann frequency, about 8 Hertz, can support dream telepathy and clairvoyance. At the same time, Schumann resonance can't explain improved telepathic communications in the state of sleep at very large distances, neither communication with the dead. And if somebody is getting a message from alien from another planet, it's too far. So Earth's electromagnetic resonance wouldn't help. So an idealistic interpretation here could be that during sleep or relaxation, the conscious agent, this quantum field, is less concerned about the avatar. The avatar is sleeping, is breathing, and that's all it needs, actually. And so the conscious agent can activate its ESP abilities. When it receives its information, it can later copy the information to the brain waves, and then sometimes people recall their dreams, and sometimes very special dreams, and so on. Now, I believe that ESP activates during NDE. During NDE, the interface between the conscious agent and the avatar or material body is broken. EEG shows flat line. The conscious agent retains awareness of the body's location. But when the physiology of brain function is suspended, telepathy and clairvoyance seem to kick in, become the primary means of communication and cognition per testimonies of NDEers. This, you can find a lot of examples like this in books by Moody, Ring, and other books on near-death experience. Now, Pim van Lommel observed a positive correlation between the clarity of consciousness measured by ESP and brain function loss. Now, Edgar Mitchell, who of course founded IONS, and Helané did her great presentation. She represents IONS. He made an interesting observation in his paper in year 2000. So he believed that though the remote communications are the fact, they're confirmed, there is a big problem with explaining them, and he believed this to be the problem of topology. He asked, what shape can the universe have such that one point can be in simultaneous contact with all other points? Based on literature, in my view, the answer to this may be the topology of the flower of life containing voids in it. Now, this is just a picture. Flower of life is represented as a lot of overlapping spheres. And between the spheres is the void. This is the void. So the elements of space and time are connected into the flower of life. The infinite number of dimensions can be seen as spheres. The space in between and outside of the spheres is known as the void. Accessing the void, you can connect with any point in space, but also in time. ESP communications through space and time occur through the void. This is the idea of this model presented on marcelfogel.org website. In my opinion, the structure of the flower of life deserves further research as an important element of the framework for ESP phenomena. Now, how is space-time created in the network of conscious agents? If space-time is not fundamental, how does it emerge within the network of conscious agents? And one tentative answer was done by Juan Maldacena on the conference in 2004. And he believed that the whole space-time and its content is dynamically generated by the particles living on the boundary based on his conjecture known as ATS CFT correspondence, or basically it's holography for anti-de Sitter space. Rafael Busso is currently working on a holographic model for our real 4D space-time. The space-time boundary contains the holographic film generating the hologram of our 4D space-time world per this model. This is just a picture from Maldacena presentation, adapted from his presentation. So space-time and everything again emerges dynamically out of the particles, interaction with the particles living on the boundary. Now a little bit about Green's function, application by David Bohm. So he modeled space-time and its content with a hologram. And this helps to understand non-locality of consciousness, in my opinion. Consider an arbitrary object illuminated by a beam of coherent laser light of frequency omega that interferes with a reference laser beam of the same frequency to produce an interference pattern representing an image of the object on a holographic plate. In this case, the amplitude of laser wave at the illuminated object A is related to the amplitude B at the plate as follows by formula 1, where G is Green function, where X is coordinate vector corresponding to illuminated object, Y is 1 relevant to the plate, integration is done on the whole surface of illuminated object, and G is Green's function, given by formula 2. Formula 1 shows that the amplitude B in each point of the plate is a function of amplitudes A integrated by X over the whole illuminated surface of the object. Figure 1, I showed above, illustrates a special case of holography where the role of photographic plate is played by curved space-time boundary. Figure 1 and Formula 1. So this is Figure 1. Figure 1 and Formula 1 show that the vicinity of every point Y located on the space-time boundary contains a small image of the whole space-time, including its contents. In this sense, the representation of space-time on its boundary is non-local. So if we make an additional assumption that consciousness functionality is originated within space-time boundary, it seems likely that consciousness inherits non-local properties from its non-local parent. In the recent interview taken by Brian Greene, Maldacena hinted that to apply holographic model to infinite space, we should just take a limit with a space boundary approaching infinity. Oops. Sorry. So, alternative mechanism of ESP. Thus, we identified two options. ESP might work through the void or through the curved space-time boundary. We could see on the picture of the flower of life that space-time boundary appears to be a close neighbor of the void. While these are speculations, of course, the big Fermat theorem, the Higgs boson were first also speculations, but they stimulated research in the right direction nevertheless. Now, the postulate of primacy of consciousness requires us to reconsider the traditional physicalist criteria for validating new consciousness theories. Rather than relying solely on material experiments, we should shift the emphasis towards collecting evidence in the domain of psychology. Thoughts are primary, after all. So perhaps it means relying more on anonymous service of human thoughts and opinions, but this requires additional research on how to objectively test new consciousness theories based on psychology. The turn to idealism means it's time to limit our obsession with matter and material evidence necessarily. Thoughts are important too, and maybe sometimes more important. Importantly, such surveys become common now not only in politics, but also in colleges, where anonymous surveys are now routinely collected on students with different goals, including optimization and raising efficiency of college education. now I want basically to, I'm almost done. So Agent Paul Wigner, Nobel Prize in Physics, he said that both physics and psychology claim to be all-embracing disciplines. The first, physics, endeavors to describe all nature. The second deals with all mental phenomena. And nature exists for us only because we have knowledge of it, the cognizance of it. Both disciplines may yet to be united in a common discipline. Yeah, and after listening Helané's presentation, I think that some information can be relevant from the marcelfogel.org. So the void-based mechanism of ESP is presented on this website, but also some information is presented. Helané mentioned the Galactic Federation of Worlds, and there is a lot of talks on the internet that in some future, nobody knows which future, close or remote, Earth can be even accepted into Galactic Federation of Worlds. But this website provides some details about when there will be this official inclusion of humanity in Galactic Federation of Worlds. This will be one of the key secrets when good aliens will release mechanism of ESP to humanity, because that is one of the points that they know very well and use. That's all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Just to make a gentle link between what you stated in your presentation and the technology that Ulf was talking about, you stated love being a trigger for ESP potentially, remote communications, things that way. But the technology Ulf's talking about with REGs and what he referenced, the Global Consciousness Project, that's a network-wide set of EEGs around and resonating with particular events in human activity. And one of the things that's fascinating about that is it's taking into account things that are unpleasant, such as 9/11, et cetera, but there's a greater effect size shown on those events when it's events based on love and compassion. So there's some relation there in a way that's not explicable, no mechanism offered, but there's a lot of correlation for love being an element that has a force beyond physicality.
Yeah, thank you very much for the good comment. Yeah, I appreciate it. And it makes sense to me too.
Another question back there. Run the mic back.
Thank you, Anatoly. In your presentation of idealism, of course, there are strong and weak versions of idealism, because you seem to give credit to the fact that we have bodies, that we live in nature, we live on this planet. So you're giving a certain reality to them. Now, I certainly believe that I only experience the world within my mind, but I consider it from a realist point of view in that my consciousness is real, I believe my mind is real, and I believe that it takes something realish out there in order to generate the experiences that I have in my mind. So is that your kind of style of idealism, rather than the very strong idealism that there ain't nothing out there? There ain't even my body. There ain't no brain, because all there is my mind.
My point of view is close to yours. Of course there is matter. Of course there are physical bodies, but the question is who is in charge? And I think thoughts are more important after all.
Yes, and I would agree with you then that we cannot consider the external world entirely objective, because it is a product and it is influenced continually by our thoughts interacting with it and how we respond to it. And bringing in love with that, I think, is very important.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comment.
Thank you so much. Gabriel, Guerrer. And
I said, I hope he's okay.
Okay, yeah, no.
Good. You made it.
Yes. Gabriel Guerrer.
Hello. Thank you. It's great to see the room full as this, since a day full of activities. So thank you very much for you being here. So I'm Gabriel. I'm a physicist. And I start my scientific journey trying to understand the universe by the ways of matter. So I studied particle physics, work in a particle accelerator at CERN. But then, after a very magical sabbatical year in Brazil, my interests shift toward consciousness. And now I'm currently a researcher at IDOR, which is a private institution in Brazil. And I'm fellow of the Pioneer Science Initiative, which provides funding for frontier research. So the topic of this talk will be anomalous interactions, which I'll define as the supposed ability of consciousness to influence distant physical systems through yet unidentified mechanisms. So the general idea on those experiments is that, it's also called mind-matter interactions, micropsychokinesis. So the general idea is that you have a physical system which provides measurements with some degree of uncertainty, and then you have a participant, a person, which will try to affect, wow, this is some anomaly happening here. This was not supposed to go like this, the thing goes to the other side, but you understand, right? So the conscious, it started already. Who done it? Okay, so the conscious agent tries to affect the physical system using his mind alone, while usually receiving some real-time feedback which describes the system's status. Is this a reasonable inquiry? I would defend yes, because we don't know what is consciousness, as we can see here in this conference, and maybe if consciousness is something more fundamental, well, we can have some causal properties that would connect to this idea of anomalous interactions. And also we have a decades of body of data of empirical research from the field of parapsychology, although I consider the findings there's some evidence, but I consider it to be controversial. So the proposal, it's an open-minded approach here where I'm gonna entertain the hypothesis that anomalous interactions are real. At the same time, they should require some sort of novel experimental design to produce replicable findings, because this is one of the questions here. Are those phenomena replicable? So I'm going to employ advanced methodologies where the study that I'm going to present here was pre-registered. We're going to use AMP controls, and we commit to self-replication in case of significant findings. Also, what I'm going to present out here, it's open source, the hardware and the software also, so other scientists can do the same experiment if they want. The physical device I'm using is a random number generator, which is an electronic device that produces zeros or ones with 50% probability each, which defined mathematically like this, which I'm going to call the bit balance condition. So these devices are built to respect this condition, that for a long term, when you have a large number of random draws, they should be 50% of each. While the traditional experiments in the field, they ask if the participants can actually induce a deviation from 50%. So the traditional experiments actually try to violate the bit balance condition, which is the condition that the devices are built to respect. So I'm asking here myself if this is not a too tight condition. If, as an analogy, for trying to violate the conservation of energy, and that's actually too much. So what I'm going to do in this study is to propose 4 different experiments where the first one follows the traditional design, but we have more 3 experiments that will try to explore deviation patterns that remain compatible with the condition which these devices are built to respect. So the circuit that I'm using is the Wahbeh device. It's an open source RNG that I developed. It's based on avalanche noise. Unfortunately, I don't have time to explain all the details, but there's a publication in IEEE Access describing all the details, how it works. It's open source. And there's some statistical tests there. There's stochastical model, all details in the article. For the feedback part of the experiment, I'm going to use a circle, a varying diameter circle, which is updated at 10 hertz, which is the data that I read, the random bytes. And the circle will represent the deviation from chance expectation. So larger the deviation, larger the circle. And this is cumulative, meaning that every moment in the experiment, the size of the circle represents the whole data that was collected so far. For the participants, the recruiting is not conditioned to any particular performance measurement, but 1/3 of the participants in the experiments, they return from previous experiments I conducted in the same topic. There is no specific requirement for group affiliation, but I can say that in practice, the participants were very motivated and curious about the topic. Remember, this is Brazil, so there's a cultural opening and people are interested usually in this kind of topics. So a considerable fraction of the participants could be described as this. So the task of the participant experiment is pretty simple. We don't talk about bits, byte circuit, no. They just have the simple task of when looking to the circle, intend the circle expansion. Simple like this. At the same time, very hard because we cannot explain how you do that, right? So it's a subjective task and they are informed that they should use their background, their experiences, and their intuition on how to do that. At the same time, we suggest that they can associate the circle with the accomplishment of something that is meaningful to them. Like when the circle grows, imagine that this thing that you really desire is happening and you are there and you are feeling it happening, right? So give some purpose to the circle. All right, so for the physical system, we have the circuit, the Wahbeh circuit. For the feedback, we have the varying diameter circle, we have the participant. And one important detail here is that the experiment occurred in a remote setup via video conference, meaning that the participant was far away from the device. But this was not an online website, no. We had an experimenter here, Soraya, which would schedule a video conference with the participant, would greet the participant, talk a little bit, ask how things are going, blah, blah, blah. Conduct the experiment, and after, talk again with the participant to record anything that the participant would like to report, and the cessation and everything. So we try to create a very warm situation for the participant, even if through video conference. So the task of the participant, as I said, was to intend the increase of the circle, because indirectly we are trying to see if the participant can induce a shift here, a deviation from chance, reminding that the large circle represents a large shift here, so the participant intending this can affect this here. That was the question of the experiment. And the session lasts 8 minutes. The first 3 minutes is just for relaxing. The participant is invited to breathe and sit and relax. And then for 5 minutes, the circle show up, and the participant then have the task to intend the circle increase. For these 5 minutes, I generate 3,000 bytes, so the whole session generates this amount of random data, which is equivalent to 24,000 bits. And as the session with the participant finished, we run a sham session, which is an identical session, but without no one watching the circle. So there's no participant, and we're going to see, compare the two results, right? So now start to explain the experiments. Experiment number 1 is, remember, the traditional idea. So the question is, can we see a statistical deviation from this 50% of zeros and ones? So we generate per session 24,000 bits. If we can make here a histogram showing the number of amount of zeros and ones that we obtain in one session, and under chance expectation, if nothing is going on, we would expect something like this. We have just a small number, some fluctuations, something like this. But of course, the question here is, can the participant induce more ones than zeros? Or also the opposite, because we're going to apply a two-tail analysis using binomial analysis here, a two-tail which will produce then a p-value that is the result of this session. Okay, so the next experiments explore this idea that we will now look for other ways of probing the phenomena, respecting the 50% condition in the RNG. I will not have time for experiment 2, so I'll jump to 4 and then return to experiment 3. In experiment 4, what we do is that we produce 2 bytes instead of 1 at every 100 milliseconds. And then we produce 1 bit more that now will select one of these 2 bytes. And then, after we select the byte, we proceed with the same analysis of experiment 1. So, the idea is, while all generated bits respect the bit balance conservation, a bias may occur if anomalous interactions influence the byte selection mechanism. So, for example, let's say that we have these 2 bytes that were generated, and then the byte selection is 1, meaning that we're going to actually select this one. And then for the second iteration of the experiment, we have these 2 bytes, and because it's 0 now, we're going to select the first one. So if you count here, you'll see that we have generated in total 34 bits, and 17 are 0, so we are in the 50%. We are respecting the condition that the equipment must go through. But if you count in the selected bits, you see that we have an excess of zeros now. So the idea of experiment 4 is maybe the anomalous interaction acts as some sort of Maxwell demon from thermodynamics, which actually selects the bytes that can provide some sort of bias. That's the idea of experiment 4. For experiment 3, we will start looking to bytes instead of bits. So when you think about bytes, we have, another anomaly here, nice. So this was supposed to be the sequence of bits here. So we have 000, 0001. I mean, there are 256 different ways that you can combine zeros and ones. So given 1 byte, you have these 256 categories that for 1 session, we can produce now the histogram of how was the distribution of the bytes in the session. So we have 3,000 bytes per session. If we divide by the number of categories, we expect an average here of 11.7 events for each of the bytes. And now, for this experiment 3, what we're going to do is we're going to calculate a chi-square test here that tests how close are these actual values from the expected mean. We generate a p-value now for experiment 3. And the idea of experiment 3 is that it is possible to have byte bias while conserving the bit balance. How it works. For example, let's say that we start from an unbiased sample at both the bit and the byte level. And we're going to perform the following operation. We're going to take all bytes that have at least 1 somewhere, and we're going to change these bytes to this one. So see, we are not changing the balance between zeros and ones. There's always a 1 and a 0 somewhere, just changing the order. When you change the order, we nullify the representation of 7 categories here. So mathematically, what this does is that this increases the chi-square and the byte bias, but we are not changing the number of zeros and ones. So we find another way here to preserve bit balance and cause some other form of deviation. So basically, the idea here is that in experiment 3, we are trying the order of zeros and ones matter. The timing ordering of the bits is what's important. We're going to see if the participants can somehow affect the ordering of the bits. So this experiment was pre-registered at the Open Science Foundation. We defined that for stage 1, we would proceed with 60 sessions for each of the 4 experiments, and also 60 corresponding sham sessions following. And that the p-values would be combined using Fisher method to have a general p-value per experiment. And then we use the AMP protocol that defines one experiment's success as the probability of participants being below 5%, and the sham needs to be 5 to ensure that we don't have any systematical error going on. And we also define in the prior registration that the most successful experiment, if any, will trigger self-replication. So we're going to do it again with a larger sample size. We predefined that. Okay, here are the results. Are you ready? I wasn't. When I had to click the button to see the results, was like, oh my God, it's now. So it was a very interesting moment. Remember, because I just saw the results when the experiment finished, so I was kind of blind during the process, like what's going on. Okay, so remind that what we would like to see for anomalous effect here are p-values here below 5 for the participants and above 5 for the sham. Okay, experiment number 1, traditional, oh my God, also anomaly, but I hope it will work. So this was the participant, this is the sham, and it didn't result in a success, right? Okay, number 2, oh my God, what is the number? 81, okay, thank you very much. Such an interesting anomaly, okay. So also was false. For the 3rd experiment, 98 and 44 also was false. And here, oh my God, 95%. You're here with me, okay? 95, and here 89. So, unfortunately, none of the experiments met the pre-register success criteria, and consequently, none advanced to the self-replication stage. So the conclusion from this round is that we cannot, with the results, we cannot justify rejecting the null hypothesis. At the same time, when you look to these numbers, they are somehow interesting. They are large. They are above 95%. So they are rare somehow. And when we see these numbers, what happened is that we made an exploratory analysis without wanting to do it. Because the number were there and we saw something different. So this is an exploratory analysis that we made in the end. So given this effect here, we don't know if this happened by chance, which could be the case, or this is kind of the signature of the phenomena. Since you have no theory, you expected the variable to increase, but actually when consciousness acts with the system, it reduces so we had to do it again, but now expecting to see a larger than 95%. So that was the next step that was completed in May of this year. we pre-registered then a confirmatory experiment with 150. Remember, we started with 60 per experiment. So now, and we went for experiment 3 only, the replication of experiment 3. So we departed from 60, now we've done 150 sessions of experiment 3 to see if we can see now again, if this happens again, if we can replicate this effect of seeing a participant effect now above 95, and now the Shen, the opposite situation. So again, we pre-register. If this was successful, we will do now a 3rd time to see how replicable is the phenomenon. Before asking other scientists to replicate our finding, we ourselves commit to try to replicate, to see what's going on. So now is the real definitive thing. Are we able to confirm the previous finding? Are you ready for this, Barcelona? Okay, let's go. So the result was this one. Yes. So the participant was like 62 here, so there was not a success. We are not able to confirm the effect. So it didn't reach the success criteria, and the results here don't justify rejecting the null hypothesis. Remember, the null hypothesis is the hypothesis that there is nothing going on. So for this discussion, it's more likely that the original results were due to chance alone. And I don't see here a clear evidence of anything anomalous in the data. So I think that this is a very important topic for the area that we should be discussing in the backstage. If I stopped in the exploratory, I could reach a false conclusion that there was something interesting going on because, look, I had a 98% effect. But if I do it again, I don't see it. So when we do statistics, there's always the probability of finding all the p-values from 0 to 100%, they are uniformly distributed. Under null hypothesis, you can find anything by chance alone. Randomness is such that you find rare things by chance. And the more you can explore your data, more you can find those things. So pre-registration, it's absolutely necessary to ensure that you are not going through the problem, what we call a questionable research practice, of uncorrected p-values following multiple exploratory analysis. You can correct, as you showed that you use some correction, right? But this is very important matter for the field. We should be really discussing this. And of course, I acknowledge all possible criticism, and I'm also very open to discuss it, right? What could be the sources of not finding something here? And finally, this work is important to say that this work provides a toolbox for scientists wanting to perform the same kind of experiment. So there's the open hardware, the Rava device. The software is open also, is in a GitHub repository. The software was made before running the experiment, so all the analysis tools were ready before running, so I cannot also change something in the software later. And also a methodological framework. Me and my colleagues, we would really like to see the field advance using this kind of methodological care for ensuring that our p-values that we're showing here are meaningful. And so all laboratories can use, adapt, or even expand the software to perform the experiments, exploring other variables or the way they want with their own settings. If anyone is interested, please contact me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. That was amazingly wonderful. I had a question, maybe I missed it, in terms of the timing for the participants relax versus attend. Was it 3 minutes relax and then 5 minutes attend, and then did that repeat?
No, it was a short. It was 3 minutes and then 5, and that's it. We didn't
Okay.
perform multiple. There was
Okay.
no window of relax and then attention and relax attention. It was simply one window, 5 minutes of attention.
Okay, great. And so what are your thoughts about people actually sustaining their attention and intention for that length of time? Because that's actually quite long.
Yeah, usually it's like 1 minute. At the
Yeah.
same time, I think that changing the state of the mind, like now you relax and now you meditate, also is not trivial in the window of 1 minute that usually the experiments use, right? So
I'm just curious about if there's any variability within that 5-minute window. I guess that's what my underlying question.
yeah, I didn't explore the data in that sense to look the windows. I can do it, yeah. At the same time, if you start exploring, you will find stuff. You know, so, yeah. The sham session is an identical session that occurs right after the participant session. As the video conference, no, there's no person watching the feedback. In the sham session, the difference, in the participant session, there's someone in the video conference watching the circle and intending it to increase. So in the sham, the same experiment is happening, but no one is watching the circle, right?
But it's the same in yourself. Somebody else was there, humans that have done it.
No humans in the sham experiment.
Even not yourself?
No. No, because the experimenter, even in the participant session, the experimenter is not seeing the circle. So the experimenter greets the participant, and when the session starts, he closes the monitor so he doesn't see anything.
It doesn't matter if you can see it or not. It doesn't matter.
I didn't understand.
You don't have to see the circle. It's enough to got intention. You don't have to see the circle.
No, the experimenter don't see the circle during.
I know that doesn't see, but it doesn't matter if it doesn't see. If it's got intention, it doesn't have to see the circle. It's enough to got intention. It doesn't have to see the circle. That's a bug.
Okay, maybe we discuss it later, okay? Thanks.
Okay, we should move on. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
I'll be here around. Let's guess, thank you.
Okay, next we have Álex Escolà-Gascón with a translator. Okay.
Bien, buenas tardes.
Good evening, everyone.
A diferencia de mis compañeros, Naya es mi traductora e intérprete.
Unlike my colleagues, I'm coming here with a translator. I am Naya, will be the translator for the session.
Y vengo a presentaros los resultados de un estudio sobre percepción extrasensorial que realizamos en una serie de condiciones bastante particulares.
And I am here to introduce you to the results of an ESP study we did under very particular conditions.
Para quienes me conozcan, saben que me gusta comenzar mis charlas con alguna frase reflexiva. Yo pertenezco a la Universidad Pontificia de Comillas, que es una institución de la Santa Sede, del Vaticano, y esta frase es de San Juan de la Cruz.
So for those of you who may have heard of me before, you know I like to start my presentations with a thoughtful sentence. And I actually belong to the Universidad Pontificia, which is an institution that is affiliated with the Vatican.
La Iglesia Católica no niega el misterio y, de hecho, reconoce que la vida y Dios son un misterio.
Catholic Church doesn't deny mystery, and in fact, it recognizes that life and God are a mystery.
Algunos se han empeñado en confrontar parapsicología y Iglesia Católica, pero en realidad no están confrontadas. Numerosos sacerdotes
han investigado sobre parapsicología y han usado el método científico para ello.
So many people insist on confronting parapsychology in the church. However, they do not have to be confronted, as in fact, many priests themselves have investigated into parapsychology.
Aquí tienen los contenidos de los que voy a hablar. Haré una introducción sobre cuáles son los desafíos actuales a los que nos enfrentamos y cuáles fueron las particularidades de nuestra investigación.
So here are the contents I am going to delve into. We will take a look at the challenges that parapsychology is currently facing, and then we will later on discuss some of the results of our own research.
Sorry, can you step aside? I cannot see the slide.
Pots moure una mica, perquè no pot veure la
que me mueva.
presentació, sisplau.
Thanks.
Per passar les diapos.
Bien.
Well.
Bajo mi punto de vista, la parapsicología arrastra 3 tipos de problemas que no los he identificado yo. Algunos de vosotros reconoceréis al escéptico que ahí menciono, Hyman, pero creo que son puntos esenciales.
Well, parapsychology traditionally has to deal with 3 main limitations that I have not developed by myself. You may have heard previously about Hyman, which is the skeptical that is mentioned in this slide. And we are now going to explain a bit more about them.
Cuando nos planteamos abordar la parapsicología científicamente y concretamente la percepción extrasensorial a través del método científico, nos encontramos con la primera limitación, que es comparar los aciertos y los resultados con aquello que esperamos por el azar.
So, when we talk about talking about parapsychology from a scientific perspective, we find our first limitation, which is comparing it to chance, to the limitations that we can obtain by pure chance and randomness.
Debéis saber que el azar como criterio teórico se utiliza en la ciencia, se utiliza en la física para identificar o como contraste para detectar patrones no aleatorios, es decir, que difieren de lo azaroso.
So we are using chance in both physics and psychological investigations in order to detect patterns that tell us that something is not random, that it is not happening just by pure chance or luck, let's say.
El problema que ha pasado por alto es que el azar en sí mismo no nos resuelve qué misterio estamos detectando. Puede hacernos saber qué efecto, pero no la fuente de ese efecto, ni de su proceso, ni de cómo se desarrolla.
So chance itself, however, has failed to be able to tell the source it is coming from. We can definitely tell we are detecting something, but we cannot elaborate on the details of how it is processed or how is it developing.
Sé que para algunos de vosotros estos matices son obvios, pero creo que son importantes porque son la base de la investigación y lo que nos motiva también a mejorar lo que ya tenemos.
So these nuances may be a bit obvious for some of you. However, they are our motivation to keep researching and investigating about what we know already, and to find new things.
La siguiente limitación es concebir la percepción extrasensorial, psi, la señal psi, justamente como algo que nuestro cerebro rastrea. Y esto también ha sido una cosmogonía, una lógica que ha limitado la investigación y ha limitado la manera en cómo nos aproximamos para medir el fenómeno.
So the second limitation we have has been understanding extrasensory perception, ESP, as a signal that our brain is tracking. So this is some kind of cosmogony that has been limiting our vision and how we are approaching the entire subject.
Esto ha hecho que, en el mejor de los casos, incluso los escépticos que aceptan la parapsicología o sus fenómenos, la limiten a anomalías, a cuestiones inexplicadas que requieren de una solución. Y la pregunta es, pues, ¿cómo podemos ir más allá de estos 3 puntos y de estas 3 limitaciones? Nosotros, mi equipo de investigación, proponemos un nuevo tipo de aprendizaje que es de lo que os voy a hablar.
So about the last of the factors, when we're talking about these C signals, they have been falling into the category of mere anomalies, something that just needs to be explained, that we need to find like a logical or otherwise explanation for. And we believe that this approach is limiting in itself, and we intend to go beyond it. And now we are going to tell you about our results of how we've done this.
Para ello tenemos que resumir al menos y disculpar el rollo, pero tenemos que comprender cómo funciona el aprendizaje.
So we are very sorry for the long talk. However, we have to introduce a bit of a background on how learning works in order to understand this.
El aprendizaje clásico, bajo mi punto de vista, lo podemos resumir diciendo que cualquier forma de aprendizaje se da con alguna de estas 4 tipos de asociaciones.
So we know about classical learning, that any kind of learning comes from any of these 4 types of associations.
Las clásicas o las pertenecientes al condicionamiento clásico son las 2 primeras y las 2 últimas son las relativas al condicionamiento operante de Skinner. Las primeras se basan en la asociación entre estímulos y estímulo-respuesta.
So first of all, we have like the classical conditioning, and second of all, the later 2 are relevant in terms of operative conditioning. The first one deals with stimulus and how it has a response or replies to another stimulus, and the second one talks a bit more about consequence.
Los principios científicos que rigen el aprendizaje clásico son los que veis aquí. Habría alguno más, pero para que nos hagamos una idea, estaríamos hablando de un principio de simultaneidad temporal, un principio relativo a las contingencias del espacio y de linearidad. Y ahora explicaré cada uno de ellos.
So these are the principles of classical learning: simultaneity, contingency in space, and linearity, and I am going to define them a bit in a bit more of detail now.
El principio de simultaneidad temporal se refiere a que la asociación entre las 2 partes, sean estímulos, respuestas, respuestas, consecuencias de cualquier tipo, cuanto más cercanas en el tiempo se den, mayor probabilidad de éxito habrá en el aprendizaje. ¿De acuerdo?
So the first principle, temporal simultaneity, defines that the closer in time that the stimulus and the response to that stimulus are, the easier it will be for learning.
El principio de la contingencia espacial, primero defino lo que es contingencia. Contingencia es una asociación, es digamos, una coincidencia entre 2 partes.
So the second principle, spatial contingency, first of all, we will explain what contingency means. It is an association between 2 parts.
Cuando hablamos de contingencia espacial, quiere decir que la asociación se tiene que producir en un espacio compartido entre las 2 partes asociadas.
And when we talk about spatial, we mean that both of these parts that are being associated have to share a same space.
Si yo tengo un perro en una sala y otro perro en otra habitación y pretendo enseñarles a sentarse ante una orden, pero la recompensa se la doy al otro perro y no al que a mí me interesa, habría una ruptura del espacio.
So as an example, let's say we have 2 dogs in 2 different rooms, and I want them to learn something, and I have to give a reward to the dog for it to learn. If I give the reward to the dog that is sitting in the other room, the dog that I have in this room will not develop the learning of what I am trying to teach it.
Pero, en este ejemplo, la parapsicología nos dice que nuestro perro sí aprendería, o podría aprender.
However, parapsychology poses that in this particular case, our dog, the one that is in our room, would be able to learn regardless.
Ese es el desafío científico que tenemos que enfrentar.
That is the scientific challenge that we are addressing.
La linearidad se refiere a la relación proporcional. Cuanto mayor sea la recompensa, mayor será la capacidad de respuesta que obtendremos por parte del sujeto que esté aprendiendo.
And last but not least, linearity poses that the more we increase the reward, the more that we will get a response from the subject who is learning.
Si al perro le doy 5 galletas en lugar de una cada vez que se sienta cuando yo quiero, aceleramos su aprendizaje.
So we can speed up the learning rate of the dog if we give it 5 cookies instead of just one when we are telling it to sit.
Por lo tanto, alguien de vosotros podría plantearse una primera aplicación de la parapsicología, que sería ¿qué? Acelerar, optimizar procesos de aprendizaje.
So maybe one of you could think that we could find a practical use for this, which it would be to speed up learning processes in parapsychology.
Y ahora voy al punto más importante, porque lo que nos planteamos en nuestra investigación no es corresponder con cada uno de estos principios, sino violarlos sistemáticamente.
And now I am going to the most important point, which is we are not trying to follow these principles one by one, but instead we are trying to violate them.
En principio, si violamos estos principios de aprendizaje, no se tendría que producir ningún tipo de aprendizaje. Eso es lo que nos diría la ciencia ortodoxa.
So, according to Orthodox science, if we violate these principles of learning, then learning shouldn't happen.
Lo que voy a contar a continuación está todo publicado en este artículo que veis en pantalla.
What I am going to tell from now on has been published in this article that you're right now seeing on screen.
No voy a tener tiempo de detenerme en cuestiones metodológicas ni matemáticas, pero si alguno de vosotros tiene dudas sobre ello, podemos discutirlo después.
I am not going to spend very long talking about the methodical and mathematical details. However, if you are curious about it, feel free to ask later on.
Fijaros que nuestra hipótesis consiste en asumir, tratar de conjeturar, que violando esos principios del aprendizaje, cuya violación impediría desde la razón que no hubiese aprendizaje, nosotros partimos del supuesto de que sí habría algún tipo de aprendizaje, sí habría algún tipo de sistematización. Y eso estaría relacionado con la percepción extrasensorial.
So, our hypothesis poses that if we violate these principles of learning, we could still get some kind of learning that would be related to extrasensory perception, which we will shortly refer to as ESP from now on.
Por si todavía no ha quedado suficientemente claro, si esta hipótesis se confirmara, estaríamos ofreciendo una alternativa al mero hecho de ir más allá del azar, de superar el azar, porque estaríamos aportando una base sobre la cual podríamos explicar la percepción extrasensorial a través de un nuevo tipo de aprendizaje.
So, if we would confirm this hypothesis, we would be talking about explaining a new mechanism that would go beyond chance, that would go beyond what it would be explored merely by randomness, of something else that would be related to learning.
Y es un nuevo tipo de aprendizaje porque los principios clásicos que rigen el aprendizaje que la psicología enseña a día de hoy, nos los cargamos.
So, we would be talking about a new kind of learning that completely defies everything we know nowadays in psychology regarding how we learn.
Participaron 203 individuos a los que se les pidió que anticiparan el movimiento aleatorio de unos puntos.
So there were 203 individuals participating in this experiment, and they were asked to anticipate the movement of some dots in a screen.
Si alguien se plantea ¿y cuánto de aleatorio se movían esos puntos? Usamos un ordenador cuántico de IBM homologado y nos aseguramos de que la aleatoriedad fuera pura y que no hubiesen patrones latentes u ocultos en el movimiento de esos puntos.
So, in case any of you is wondering whether these pattern movements were or weren't actually random, we would like to let you know that we use an IBM quantum random generator to ensure that the patterns would be completely random and not something that the individuals may have perceived before.
Asociamos el movimiento de los puntos, que era o adelante o hacia atrás, estímulos o imágenes emocionales, que eran positivas o negativas respectivamente.
So we associated the movement of the dots, which could go either forward or backwards, with some emotion-inducing images, which were either positive or negative.
Esta contingencia aparente se hizo de manera oculta, sin que los participantes lo supieran.
This contingency was conducted blindly without the participants knowing that we were doing this.
Y se utilizó una técnica visual de supresión continua de flash.
And we used a continuous visual suppressing technique, so the participants could not see.
Además, quisimos probar la hipótesis de si los estados mentales previos podían condicionar los aciertos, haciéndolos aumentar o reducir. Y los estados mentales previos fueron dos, de reposo y de actividad.
We also wanted to test if previous mental states could condition the results. So we tested two different emotional states. One of them was with the individuals being rested, and the other one was the individuals being mentally activated to see if this changed the results that they gave.
Esta última parte se midió y se aseguró mediante electroencefalografía.
We used an electroencephalography technique to measure this last part.
Hubo tres grupos, dos grupos fueron control y uno de ellos experimental.
There were three groups. Two of them were the control groups, just for testing, and one of the groups was the experimental one, which participated in the experiment.
El grupo que nos interesa es el experimental, porque es en el que se emplearon las imágenes positivas, negativas, y el movimiento de los puntos podía ir hacia adelante o hacia atrás, además de la aleatoriedad.
So the group we will be paying most attention to in this case is the experimental group, which was the one that was shown the images that could go either forward or backwards. And we need to remember these were associated with either positive or negative images.
Noten que en el primer grupo no hubo contingencia y se usaron imágenes emocionalmente neutrales, que no eran ni positivas ni negativas. Lo mismo ocurrió con el grupo 2, con la diferencia de que en el grupo 2 el estado mental fue de reposo con los ojos cerrados, mientras que en el primero los ojos estaban abiertos y había algún tipo de actividad.
So about the other two groups, just noting that neutral images were used for both. However, the difference was that the first group had their eyes wide open, they were mentally activated, whereas the second group had their eyes closed and they were in a rested state.
Ahí tenéis una imagen donde se ve cómo configuramos cada una de las sesiones. Cada sesión tuvo 144 ensayos y en cada ensayo se le pedía al individuo que anticipara el movimiento de los puntos hacia adelante o hacia atrás.
So we had to ask for each session, each of the participants, to guess the movement of the dots for it to go either forward or backward during 144 tries.
Esta es una diapositiva importante porque podéis comprobar que rompimos con los principios que he mencionado inicialmente.
So in this slide, I am showing how we broke with the principles that we mentioned in the beginning.
Primero había, y esto se corresponde con el grupo experimental, disculpar, primero había el estado mental de reposo y el generador de eventos aleatorios producía pues, un valor binario, o un 0 o un 1.
So for the resting state, there was a value which was being generated, which was either 0 or 1.
Este 0 y 1 quedaba relacionado con las imágenes emocionales, positivas o negativas.
This 0 and 1 was related to either the positive or negative images.
En la línea temporal no hay simultaneidad entre la imagen positiva y los valores ceros y unos.
In the temporal line, there is no simultaneity between the positive images and either 1 or 0 values.
Fijaros que los valores ceros y unos también se usaron para determinar el movimiento de los puntos, el 1 hacia adelante y el 0 hacia atrás.
So 0 and 1 were also used to determine the movement of the dots, for 1 going forward and 0 going backwards.
el participante con las teclas del ordenador, con las dos flechas, tenía que determinar en 2 segundos esa anticipación del movimiento de los puntos, ¿sí?
So the participant had 2 seconds to anticipate where the dots would move, and they would have to press either one of the keys to tell where it would move.
Y ahora vayamos a los resultados, que me imagino que es lo que os interesa.
We don't have much time, so let's skip forward to the results, which I think it would be the most interesting part.
Grupo experimental.
Experimental group.
El promedio de aciertos sobre 144 ensayos
Out of 144 tries, the average success that they guessed was
81,48.
81.38.
Esto está por encima de lo esperable por el azar.
This is above what we would expect by mere chance.
El p-valor que se utilizaría en el contraste de esta hipótesis sería menor que 0,001.
So in statistics, we are using p-value to contrast this hypothesis, and it would be below 0.01, which is really significant and important value in findings.
Y como el p-valor en sí mismo no es suficiente para conocer el tamaño del efecto, calculamos la d de Cohen, y 0,461 es un tamaño del efecto moderado, es decir, que estamos superando el azar no de manera leve o de manera discreta, sino de manera explícita.
However, only using this p statistic, which is commonly using, it was not enough for us to measure to which effect we are surpassing chance. So we also used another statistic, which was Cohen's D, and we obtained 0.461 result, which means that we are not just surpassing chance by a small effect, but at least by a moderate one, which is significantly higher.
No os preocupéis por la música, es la banda sonora de mi PowerPoint.
No worries, do not worry about the music, it's the soundtrack of my slide.
Pero hasta aquí estaríamos haciendo lo que la parapsicología ya ha hecho hasta ahora, ¿verdad? No estaríamos aportando nada nuevo.
So far, we would be doing the same as parapsychology has been doing until now, and we would not be innovating at all.
Hay algo más que el azar, tenemos un efecto y la pregunta es, ¿y cuál es ese efecto? ¿Hay aprendizaje en ese efecto o no?
So we have the chance, we know that this is not by chance, and we have an effect, but how does this relate to learning?
Para mí esta es la diapositiva más importante.
This is the most important slide for me.
Lo que tenemos en el eje vertical son proporciones de acierto.
We can see on the y-axis the proportion of guesses, how much they guess.
En el eje horizontal, cada uno de los ensayos, de 0 pues hasta 144.
And on the x-axis, you can see the number of times that they tried, like all of the repetitions, until 144 for each one of the individuals.
Si la parapsicología no tuviese nada que aportar ni a la consciencia, ni a la ciencia, ni a los que estamos aquí, esta curva que veis tendría que ser completamente plana o uniforme. No tendrían que haber puntos de inflexión.
If parapsychology didn't have anything to say or to tell to all of us who are here today, we should not be observing this kind of curve, but we should be observing something completely flat.
El punto de inflexión, y concretamente el punto de inflexión en el que se produce una aceleración creciente del número de aciertos, ocurre en el ensayo 63 de 144.
So out of 144 experiments, we found out that in the 63rd try, there is a point of inflection, so we start observing a significant change.
A nivel resumido, podríamos decir que hasta el ensayo 63 lo que habría sería azar.
So basically, we could say that until the 63rd try, what is happening is explainable by chance.
Pero a partir del número 63 en adelante y hacia arriba, se produce esa aceleración de los aciertos.
However, from the 63rd try on, the guessing accelerates significantly, and there is an increased success in guessing.
Si estamos violando los principios clásicos del aprendizaje de la psicología, de la biología, de la ciencia tradicional, y se supone que esa curva tendría que ser plana y no lo es, aquí tenemos una primera fuente de evidencia para afirmar que algún tipo nuevo de aprendizaje se está produciendo y que está relacionado con lo que se denomina percepción extrasensorial.
So, if we are violating the classical principles that we know of physics, biology, and psychology, and we are talking about a new kind of learning that is being produced here because we are observing a curve. It's not completely flat. There is some kind of learning. Then we would definitely have evidence and a base to say that we are observing a new kind of learning that would not be related to these classic principles we are violating, but to ESP.
Esto no es opinología, estos son datos, ¿eh?
These are data. This is not my opinion.
Los resultados de la electroencefalografía nos revelaron que los estados mentales de reposo se caracterizaban con ondas alfa, con activaciones en lóbulos occipitales, temporales y parietales.
So the electroencephalography results showed that the states of rest were related to alpha waves activation in the lobules of the occipital area, temporal area, and parietal area. So the sides and the back of the head.
No me puedo entretener, voy a seguir adelante. Aquí tenéis una relación entre lo que vienen siendo las regiones de la corteza cerebral y, digamos, justamente los aciertos de los individuos.
I cannot take too long. However, you will find a relation here between the areas of the brain cortex and the guesses of the individuals.
Si alguien se pregunta si los estados mentales de reposo predicen la percepción extrasensorial, la respuesta es sí, y el grado en que lo predicen es en un 51,2%.
So if someone is wondering if resting states can explain how much you guess when it comes to ESP, the answer is yes, and how much did you guess is 51.2%.
Este resultado coincide con otros estudios de parapsicología relacionados con el método Ganzfeld.
And these results are actually the same as the ones that we guess with another parapsychology method, which is the Ganzfeld method.
Aunque no he tenido tiempo de profundizar en los resultados y estoy abierto a preguntas y consultas que queráis hacerme, sí tenemos al menos una primera fuente de evidencia para afirmar que el aprendizaje no se limita a los principios actualmente conocidos.
So I would love to explain a bit more about these results, but unfortunately we do not have much time, but you can ask me later on if you wish to do so. However, we do have an evidence to say that learning is not limited to the classical principles of psychology that we know nowadays.
Esto nos permite considerar seriamente la posibilidad de teorías relacionadas con la no localidad de la conciencia y dentro de ámbitos hasta ahora poco explorados como la física cuántica.
So this allows us to consider possibilities related to non-local learning processes in quantum physics when it comes to consciousness.
Pero no solo eso, porque eso ya lo sabíamos, sino que además esto se aplicaría para tratar de explicar un nuevo tipo de aprendizaje.
But not only that, because we knew this already, but however we could use this to try to explain a new kind of learning.
Ese nuevo tipo de aprendizaje en nuestro estudio lo llamamos quantum-like learning.
And we like to call this new kind of learning quantum-like learning in our research.
Yo no soy parapsicólogo, quienes me conocen saben que tengo una postura crítica, pero si tengo que dejar hablar a los datos, tengo suficientes motivos para decir que la percepción extrasensorial parece real.
So you know, some of you know that I am not a parapsychologist. I like to let the data talk for itself. However, according to this data, I have evidence and a ground to tell that ESP has some real background. There is evidence of it.
Y esto que diré sí es mi opinión.
Now, however, this that I am now going to say is actually my opinion.
En parapsicología necesitamos los científicos retomar la investigación experimental, recuperar el rigor y volver a lo que, pues bueno, hace décadas muchos de nuestros antecesores hicieron. No podemos depender únicamente de la filosofía para avanzar ni de la opinología. Necesitamos fuentes de objetividad y seguir trabajando, no solo para buscar nuevas razones para creer, sino nuevas técnicas de investigación que nos permiten medir lo que a día de hoy se nos escapa.
So when it comes to parapsychology, we can not only limit ourselves to philosophy and opinions, but we knew new techniques and methods we need to do as other people before us, decades before did, which is finding new scientific ways and measurements and developing new techniques as well as to progress.
Las opiniones, y aquí hay muchas, son como los culos, cada cual tiene el suyo.
Opinions are like assholes, each one has their own.
Por favor, ir más allá de la opinión. Gracias por vuestra paciencia y ha sido un placer compartir esto con vosotros.
Please go beyond opinions. Thank you very much for your patience, and it has been a pleasure to share this with all of you.
Question right here.
How do you know that ESP is not a part of the traditional classical method of learning without the persons that they know it? It could be that it is part of it, but that they don't know it. So how do you know that? Because that can change the results.
Bueno, esta pregunta sí tiene filosofía.
This question actually has philosophy, but I am going to answer it regardless.
En ciencia, el conocimiento no solamente es acumulativo, también tiene que tener algún grado de eliminación.
In science, knowledge is not only cumulative, it doesn't only add up, but it also needs to be restricted to certain limitations.
El conocimiento eliminativo quiere decir que un conocimiento reemplaza a otro.
Limiting knowledge means that certain knowledge that we get replaces another knowledge.
Entonces, si algo lo podemos explicar mediante principios formales,
Then if we can explain something by formal principles,
esos principios formales por definición tienen que excluir la percepción extrasensorial.
these formal principles by definition itself have to exclude ESP.
Sin embargo, estoy dispuesto a aceptar que esta postura forma parte de un paradigma que actualmente es cuestionable.
However, I am willing to accept that this point of view is part of a paradigm that we can actually question.
Hola. Primero, yo estoy muy emocionado de estar aquí con nosotros. Mira, nosotros somos en España y todavía estoy aprendiendo español, pero eso es la única estudio en español aquí en esta conferencia. Ok, entonces, yo soy una profesora de inglés. Por supuesto, ese estudio es muy importante. Entonces, mi pregunta es, ¿cuál es la cosa, lo que más importante en tu opinión? Entonces, ¿cuál es tu consejo para profesoras?
Mi consejo, bueno, lo primero, gracias. Gracias por dirigirte a mí en español. Entiendo que me preguntas sobre la aplicación de lo que he explicado aquí en el ámbito educativo. Para mí sí tiene aplicaciones y las aplicaciones van dirigidas a optimizar procesos de aprendizaje, no tanto para aumentar el número de respuestas correctas, que eso podría ocurrir, sino para acelerar procesos de aprendizaje en alumnos. De hecho, estamos continuando, hay nuevas publicaciones, esta fue en 2024, en 2025 hemos sacado 2 más que apuntan justamente a aplicaciones de este tipo. Fíjate que aquí no se trata tanto de juzgar el origen de la inmortalidad del cangrejo, sino sobre la funcionalidad, ¿no?, del objeto de estudio de la percepción extrasensorial o, en este caso, de la precognición. Gracias por el esfuerzo de dirigirte a mí en español.
Yeah, quick question. So I wonder whether all of the participants received a task with equal distribution of, like, let's say, answer 1 and answer 2. Because if it was so, as the experiment goes on, they might be, feeling which answer was underrepresented before, so they were tending to use the other answer more frequently, which explains the learning curve.
Debemos reconocer que esta fue una limitación de nuestra investigación.
We have to admit that this was a limitation of our study.
En los nuevos experimentos no se les ha dado feedback a los participantes sobre si acertaban o no.
In the new experiments, the participants did not receive feedback of whether they were guessing it correctly or not.
Y me gustaría destacar dos cosas. La primera es que si dimos feedback de los aciertos es porque la evidencia previa en la literatura de la parapsicología dice que el hecho de retroalimentar al participante con información le permite mantener sus niveles de atención.
So I would like to tell you that if we gave feedback to the participants in the first round, is because we found a literary background in parapsychology that tells that giving feedback to the participant about the guesses helps retain attention, helps keep the attention and keeping the individual engaged in the experiment.
Si los niveles de atención bajaran, eso sería un sesgo que podría anular el experimento.
If we had lower levels of attention, we would risk going into a bias of having a decreased attention level, and this could invalidate the experiment itself.
La segunda cosa que quería responder a eso es que, además de lo que dice la literatura científica de la parapsicología, es que incluso bajo esa sospecha, la investigación y sus resultados no quedarían anulados.
However, parapsychology literature tells us that despite this evidence and the results, still the experiments themselves would not be invalidated.
De hecho, sería una nueva hipótesis que tendríamos que tratar de resolver y refutar en nuevas investigaciones, y es lo que actualmente estamos haciendo.
In fact, this would actually pose a new hypothesis that we would have to further research into, which we are currently doing.
Gracias por el interés.
Thank you very much for your interest.